content marketing. I think it's happening now. It's happening before our eyes. And so this is a great topic for today. So with that being said, let me share my screen. Let's jump into it. There's a lot to cover today, a lot of practical tips, actionable advice. I can't wait. And so I'm going to share my screen right now. And let me kind of go into full screen mode here. And this is the new rules of content marketing. We're going to highlight 6 different new rules and then show you an action plan to put those new rules into action so you can get results tomorrow, this week, next week, and the weeks after that. So new rules of content marketing. I'm Ben Kaplan, CEO of Top Worldwide. And I'll give you the 45-second version of how we look at the world. And then we'll go from there, and it will all be focused on you and what you can do with this information. So Top, first of all, is a global marketing agency. I'm the CEO, founded in 2012, and we have data-driven thinking in our DNA. What that means is if you like to A/B test, if you like to multivariate test, if you like to measure and do a content laboratory, if you like to try 100 different versions of creative and alter all the little variables and see what works, you're speaking our language. TOP is actually an acronym. It stands for Test, Optimize, and Perform. And we'll give you some examples today using that methodology of testing, optimizing, and scaling to performance as we look at the new rules of content marketing. Now we actually work in 48 different marketing disciplines are organized into 6 functional groups. So I'm going to draw a lot from a lot today. We do communications and creative and digital and insights, advertising, growth. Today, we're kind of focused in content marketing, which actually sits in our creative group. But the way we do content marketing is very different. And so we're going to pull a ton from digital. We're going to talk a lot about whether we're deploying that content on social or email marketing, or some other channels, SEO, SEM included. We're going to draw from our insights group. So the way we like to do content marketing is we don't like the field of dreams approach, which is if you build it, they will come. Instead, we like to know exactly what our audience wants, exactly what they're looking for. We like to look at the data, and so there's no guesswork here. We're going to deliver what they want that ladders back to our brand value. So we're going to pull from our insights group. Certainly, we're going to talk about the growth group, because we're going to use content marketing to do things like conversion rate optimization and viral marketing and use it for lead generation. And certainly content marketing at its best can form the basis of communications, whether that's media relations or corporate communications. And I would argue that the content marketing is actually a driver of even advertising group, because more and more now we're using advertising to amplify content that's already great, not just, get eyeballs. So we're going to draw upon all 6 groups. That means it's a fully integrated presentation, and I think will be really useful no matter where you sit in the org chart. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some differences. We do these campaigns all over the world. We've been growing extremely fast. We now have boots on the ground and do work in 20 plus countries around the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the differences in content marketing. One of the things I will say is some of the lessons, if you're US based, that we've learned in the US market. What I've found is that in a lot of markets around the world, it's even more effective. So some of the cultural norms change, some of the creative changes a little bit, but the effectiveness in most instances, like for a client like Bowflex, where we're working on them in many countries around the world, we see our effectiveness increase as we go to more parts of the world. Okay, and I'm going to give you some final slide on this, some scrappy startup examples, some big brand examples. We work in the full spectrum. Okay, so let's start with what are the biggest content marketing mistakes. I want to give you a series of these and talk about them and use that to kind of ladder into the new rules. So mistake number 1 is making content that has no clear audience, right? I actually think probably a majority of companies do this, because you tend to think me first instead of you first. You as the audience, right? You as delivering value. You as addressing a real need. Me first is, here's the goal of what I want to message. Here's I want to ladder into my products and benefits and features. Here's what the C-suite has told me we need to say. Here's the new positioning of my brand. All of those are important things. We can do all of that, but the order in which we do it has to change. And then we have to think about content for the audience first that adds value. You first, we deliver value, and then we earn the right to have our message right along with it. So new rule is define your target audience in advance. And I think you'll see this like when we're creating new content, and we're not like making content and then saying, okay, now that we have it, where do we, who's a good target for this? Now that we have it, what are the SEO uses? No, we're doing it opposite. We're actually defining what are content gaps with our competitors. What is the potential long tail keyword application of this content for SEO? Doing that in advance. And we're doing that before we write a single word or film a certain, a single second or do anything on that content. We know what our purpose is. That's new rule number 1. Next one, mistake. Failing to extract all the return on investment from the time investment. So, before we work with a lot of companies, sometimes we'll get a company and they'll be like, yeah, we spent 3 months working on this white paper. It was a lot of effort. Not only, we had, 20 different people touch this at some point in the process. We had to get approval from our C-suite. They needed to do this. And then you did all this and it's like, okay, we released it. We are done. Tumbleweed blows by, right? And so all of a sudden it's like, okay, what's next? Let's move on to the next thing. So instead, the new rule looks like this, which is, how can we segment our content? How can we sort of say, let's do different geographic versions. Let's do different demographic versions. Let's do different versions for industry verticals. Let's do different use cases. So we'll often say is like, wow, you put all this work into this like 80-page white paper. And that's actually like 6 different segmented pieces of content that we can deploy elsewhere. So extract all the ROI from it. So the new rule is segment content to maximize ROI and help you reach new audiences. That's new rule number 2. And I promise you very shortly, I'm going to take all these new rules and I'm going to give you a plan for how to utilize them in an action plan that you can use next week. So next mistake, building a content calendar that has no unified message. So what happens is you want to do an editorial calendar. You want to be well planned. You don't want to do content last minute. You need sign-offs from lots of other stakeholders in this. So you just say, okay, it's May, what seems to be relevant now, it's June. Okay, what seems like would be good for June, July, and you kind of go through it. The new rule is tell a narrative story with your content choices. So not your audience, not everyone's going to experience each piece of content as you go, but this idea of this sort of like narrative, this brand arc, this story, it does come through when you get this, give a sense of your company and sort of the direction it's headed and how it's going. And what I can tell you is at that sales moment, for instance, at that moment when you're trying to convert, people are trying to get a sense of like, what is it, can I rely on this company? Where are they headed? Does it seem like it's a well-run company? Does it seem like there's a growth path? If you're a software company, if I buy this software, is it going to be obsolete because they're going to go out of business, or they're never going to update it, or there's going to be a ton of bugs? So there is a context and then there is a subtext. So context is your topic that you're trying to talk about. The subtext is what you're actually saying beneath all of that, which is often where the narrative story lies. So that's new rule number 3. Next mistake, spending 90% of the time on content creation and 10% on distribution. This is an allegory to that, like if you build it, they will come, which is for content, the key is, how do you have content that finds an audience? If you make it and it finds no audience, what is the point? So actually developing plans, developing distribution, knowing what the channel applications are, knowing what's derivative versions of this, knowing if there's a thought leadership version for the CEO and there's, a sales enablement package for the sales team. All of those things are mapped out and charted in advance. And that brings us to new rule number 4, which is build a distribution plan before you make content. So it's not like you make it and then you get in all the people and all the partners and agencies like ours and say, okay, now let's spread it out. Ideally, that distribution plan is built ahead of time and it influences the content you create. If you know this is going to go to a more technical audience, you can have a version that's more technical. If you know that, these certain industries, channels are going to be consumers of this, therefore you can kind of build it with those industries in mind. It's one of the things you can do right off the bat to make your content more relevant. Mistake. No adaptation of content to different seasonal patterns. So if you're a B2C company, if you're a B2B company, what are the seasonal patterns in your industry? How do people buy? Is it related to a fiscal year? Are there drive periods? Are there counter-cyclical drive periods? Are there certain conferences or events that cause a spike of interest or that bring people together? Too often what companies do is they say, like, this is a great piece of content. We need to release it in Q3. Why? Because it's done in Q3, because, Q3 is when we always have released our white paper. With any other internal reason, if it's not a reason based in your audience, your consumers or your customers, B2C or B2B, then chances are it's not optimal. So this is what I call identifying windows of opportunity. Like, what are the windows of opportunity in your year? What are, drive period 1, an industry event number 2, viral trend number 3? And we'll often create what we call booms, sparks, and beats. Booms are like our big content pushes. Sparks are medium sized. Beats are like the heartbeat that keeps going. And we'll pair up some of these booms with some of these key moments or sparks. And sometimes we'll do counter-cyclical things too, right? Great example of that is something like when is Amazon Prime Day? Typically, it's not a pandemic year, it's in July. Why is that? Well, Amazon drives most of their sales during the holiday season. So this is like Christmas in July, literally with Amazon Prime Day, right? So it can be counter-cyclical too. But the point is, be strategic about when content occurs, released, becomes activated, and you'll make your content much, much more effective. So new rule number 5, time your content to maximize opportunity windows. And this is something that we call calendar-based marketing. It's something that we've popularized. What it means is the practice of targeting a desired audience on peak moments throughout the calendar year when they are most likely to engage, share, and purchase. Typical marketing has this workflow. Find your target audience, find the right message, and then maybe time it. That's like personas, right? Then that's creative, and then that's flighting, traditional advertising workflow. Calendar-based marketing does the opposite. It says, what's the time? What is the relevant time? What are we saying? How are we relevant? Then what's the message that really resonates in that time? Then what audiences do we want to reach? So calendar-based marketing workflow, I think it's where a lot of content marketing is headed, because it just makes us more relevant to what's going on. And that increases all our conversion rates. And one tool, if you want to check us out, that we built just for this purpose, we built National Today. You can go to nationaltoday.com. It's the first integrated marketing platform that drives customers or consumers to take action in a single day. So basically what we created was the world's most popular site on these holiday moments like National Margarita Day or National Love Your Pet Day. And actually the biggest growth in that platform is actually B2B and healthcare, like days to celebrate National Cybersecurity Awareness Day or, colon cancer awareness month. All of those sorts of things are moments that we've kind of put in the National Today platform, but what actually underlies it sort of looks like a fun holiday site or an important cause-worthy holiday site is actually calendar-based marketing. What we found is that you can put engagement or conversion or downloads through the roof by leveraging moments first, being time-focused, and then deriving the other elements of the campaign from it. Works really well in content marketing as well. Why should your content be released on June 1st, not on July 1st or May 1st? And if you can drive it through to your target audience on that day, you have better conversion. So mistake, final kind of pairs of mistakes here before I kind of go into the plan. Making monolithic single channel content. Like, right, you're like, man, we got to be the Bible on this. We've got to be comprehensive. We want to be like, the Bible on the future of real estate. Okay, let's do it. Ambition, big is good, but what happens is people don't, except the most like engaged audience you have, no one's going through your 80-page document. No one's looking at all the nuggets of insights. So instead of that, make smaller content chunks, new rule number 6, on a more consistent basis. So if you already have big stuff, we'll start piecing out parts. I'm going to show you how to do that. But also we'd rather have, oh, here's our version of the future of real estate for millennials. And here's the future of real estate technology. And here's the future of real estate for, your first ever home buyers and all of these versions of that. So what happens is it just gives different entry points to a bigger audience. And I would argue that smaller chunks more consistently drives way more ROI than a big single chunk of content. Okay, so Jackson, I'm going to pause there. We've seen mistakes, we've seen some new rules, but now it's about implementation. Any one, comments or questions from you? You're a prolific content marketer in your own right. And then two, from the group, are there any questions? Feel free to go in the chat room and let us know. But the too long don't read version, Jackson, is like, you've got to put the audience first before yourself. Instead of big, huge monolithic things divided up in pieces. Instead of saying, this is when we want to release it for our organization, let's time it when it's most relevant for the audience, and let's develop a calendar-based marketing plan. That's kind of the big picture version. I'd love to hear questions or comments.
Sure. Well, Ben, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that I'm working on content marketing for my company, and I have this kind of great big ebook that I've already produced. It's massive. It's insightful. It's really good, right? But it's big. What do I do with that now? If you're telling me maybe like a big monolithic piece of content isn't the way to go. Let's say I've already produced it. What do I do with that?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a short answer, and then I'm going to flip the slide and give you a more complete answer. Great question. The short answer is, let's figure out ways to take it and break it down into pieces that would have all different audience and consumers and end users in different ways, and segment it to create different headlines and reinvent it, mash it up in new ways as we do that. Short answer. Longer answer is, let me show you a process we call stackable content. So can we implement these new rules to make content creation less costly and more impactful? And so stackable content is the process of making content creation more efficient, effective, and scalable by first creating your most important original material and then distilling derivative content from it. So to your question, Jackson, good news. You already got this big monolithic thing. Actually, a huge amount of work is done. Now let's make it more efficient, effective, and scalable. So here's what a content stack looks like. You start with pillar content. That's a core piece of long form content that we use as primary source material, right? That's like the kind of the big thing. In your example, the big, huge white paper. Then from that, we derive macro content, which is additional major content pieces that amplify the key ideas. So maybe it's that big white paper, but then macro content might be a webinar we do on it, and an article we do for the CEO that's in a major industry publication, and a video we did on it, or an infographic. These kind of big content pillars that sort of amplify and expand in key ways. Then we go to micro content. That's a creative mashup of pillar and macro content that's recut for new platforms and audiences. So now let's recut this. And here's the LinkedIn version, B2B. Here's the TikTok version, B2C. Here's versions for not just social platforms, but here's, the Medium post, or here's the post that's going to go in our, our email newsletter. All of those sorts of things. And then finally, nano content, which is bite-sized pieces, derived content that are reinvented and reimagined for more engagement. So when you do this right, content marketing, here's what a content stack looks like. Bam. You got one piece of pillar content, 3 pieces of macro content, 5 pieces of micro content, 7 pieces of nano content. So let's see, 1, 3, 5, 7. So 7, 5, 12, 3, 15, 16 pieces of content, all derived from that pillar. Now, here's the cool part about this. Not only is it way more efficient to make these 16 pieces of content than, 16 original, different ideas, but it's actually more on message. It tends to be more personalized to different target audiences and groups. It tends to be more relevant to different audiences, and it's more on message. So what have we done here? We just made it more efficient. We sped up your process, way easier to create content in this way. We've made it more effective. Why? It's more targeted. It's more relevant. And we've made it more scalable because we can actually take this now and we can redeploy content stacks and build out your whole calendar. So that's why there's a lot of value in thinking in this way. So here's another example. Let's look at what might be in each type. So pillar content, anthem videos and data studies and white papers and webinars, or macro content, video segments, email newsletters, blog posts, data visualizations. micro content, LinkedIn posts, social media posts, email blasts, and nano, animated GIFs, tweet storms, memes, social carousel. So the definition of what these are might be different to you, but here's my big suggestion. The most important part is the pillar content. Make pillar content whatever is easiest for you to create. Meaning, if you are a prolific writing shop or writing team, it can be written. If you've got a fantastic, webinar process and you can do that way faster, you can write, make it a webinar. That's your pillar content. If it's something else, right? It's like material from conferences you're already doing, or it's like partnership white papers you're releasing, whatever it is, start with the easiest, and then we can derive other pieces from that. And so one of the things we do when we're hired to do content marketing and we're deploying stackable content for our clients, they might come in and say, yeah, we have this library of content from 3 years. We built it. We just want more ROI from it. What can you do with it? And we'll start looking at what are the pillar content pieces we can find. Let's start building out this plan for content stacks. And then as we build out those content stacks, then we'll have all kinds of distribution plans done ahead of time. And we'll take, content that, that got audience that was equal to X, and we'll turn that audience into 15X by breaking it up into these pieces. Okay, so that raises a question. What does a content stack actually look like? Let me show you, but I'll pause there, Jackson. Is there any comments you want to make or questions for the group? And if you're listening to this, I would love to know what is pillar content you have, right? Or Jackson, you're in a ton of, meetings with, clients every day, almost too many meetings sometimes, Jackson. What are the pillar content that you're seeing, other things that we can kind of talk about how we would derive a stack from it?
Sure. Well, one thing I'd love to talk a little bit about, Ben, is that for many of our clients and many of the companies that we consult with, one of the most important end goals in many cases for the companies we work with is actually capturing a mailing list. And a big part of the way that they do that is there might be that big juicy piece of pillar content. And in order to access it, the kind of cost of entry to that pillar content is handing over your email address and signing up.
Sure, it's gated, right? You're going to get a lead from this. We're going to give you this, but you're going to become a lead for us.
But in order to get to build interest, a lot of the work that actually goes into marketing that big juicy piece of gated content is actually giving away a lot of the best value from that gated content, via social media channels or via other kind of marketing means, in order to encourage people to move down funnel
absolutely. Because here's the other part, right? And Jackson, see if you agree. I mean, the big juicy piece of content. By the way, we should like figure out a good acronym for this, like right, the big hairy juicy whatever it is piece of content. But like that has a certain audience, right, that wants to consume that. Two things. One, that audience is probably not your entire audience. The one that's going to be like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for Jackson's big juicy piece of content. I'm blocking out my weekend and I'm just going to study this thing, right? I know I know you have people like that, Jackson, but that's probably not everyone that might consume it. Number one. And then number two, maybe you have people who can get there, right? They might be Jackson's biggest fan, but they might need a little bit. They might need like some bite-sized morsels. Be like, oh, that was really good. That's a good point. Like, oh, that's a really interesting bit of data. Like, oh, that's a different way of looking at it. Would really impact our business, right? Like, oh, wow, there's that. And you can get them to be that, sure, monolithic content consumer. They just might not get there right away, right? So that's why I think those content stacks are important, and it gives different entry points. I'll give you an example. And then I'll give you the actual example in the slides. But so I'm going to give you one primary example, then a secondary example. Primary example is we did a content stack for a client, and it was an interview with Steve Jobs' former publicist, who's now a sort of a brand strategy expert. And so we did that. It was a piece of content. It was done in podcast form. We help with folks' podcasts. And it was a nice piece that talked about, really the focus was like the three different types of companies that exist and understanding your type and using that to build a brand strategy. So nice piece of content. Now, as one aside, in this long interview, she actually talks about how she got fired by Steve Jobs 5 times. Demanding boss, as I take it. And also she was doing this in a joking way. She got fired by Steve Jobs 5 times. She got hired by Steve Jobs 5 times as well, right? So obviously she was doing something right too, was being a little self-deprecating. But that was a great anecdote, how I got fired by Steve Jobs 5 times. So that headline How I Got Fired by Steve Jobs 5 Times, as a piece of macro content delivered over LinkedIn, brought in a whole new audience that was highly interested in that. The Steve Jobs reference helped, but there was a whole new audience for that piece of content that wouldn't have been the people that are like, yes, I want to know the 3 roles, the 3 types of companies, and how that impacts my brand strategy, right? Some people would consume that, but others that could get that might come in through this like Steve Jobs firing side door. And so that's an example of how content stacks give you bigger audiences. So what does a content stack actually look like? Let me show you. So here's an example of, I just kind of pulled this from one of our clients, of pillar content creation, a white paper, Pandemic Wellness Survey 2020. So this was the basis of it. We're like, let's do this survey. Let's release this white paper on people's attitudes to wellness during the pandemic. Okay, nice piece of content there. Let's start building the stack. That turned into a video segment. So on this stat, 84% of Americans seek new experiences to be happy, and how new experiences were a driver of wellness. That became a video segment. Or it also became a blog post. This was macro content. So over half of US values experience over possession. So we pulled out one part of that. Remember, this is like pandemic wellness. Now we're dialing into experiences and the role of experiences in wellness. Another piece of macro content, we did the infographic. So now we took it in a different direction. We said, are you getting outdoors enough? This was for a brand that has a service offering related to experiencing the great outdoors. So now we turned it into a macro content and infographic. We also turned it into micro content about Arizona residents top in the US and love of road trips. So we took a little side part of that survey, segmented it for each state, did what we call, we have 27 different blueprints for this. We call it a geo ranking, because we rank states against each other. And then we released this as focused on Arizona audiences and people interested in road trips. We also did a version of micro content for LinkedIn posts that said 65% of employers say they encourage remote work. So part of wellness, a different aspect of this was, and during the pandemic, as you might imagine, remote work was related to that. And so now we were releasing interesting information about that for LinkedIn, more of a business side of this pillar content. We also did a Facebook post. This was more fun because there was both a business audience and a consumer audience. We did a post that said 39% of people say they have, we coined a term. This is our disease blueprint called nature deficit disorder. So we created that, again, encouraging people to get outside. We deployed that into an email newsletter. So now, what is your vacation persona type? You're going to use this platform to go on a vacation. There's different personas, it turns out. Okay, that's micro content. And then we did animated GIF versions where we had certain stats and from the survey that we delivered on social. So Instagram, 33% say digital detox is not a nice to have. That was another element of the survey. So the point I want to make, and just to go back here, we're from Instagram to GIF to email newsletter to Facebook post to LinkedIn post to Twitter post to infographic to blog post to video segment. Boom, here's the pillar content, the survey. So this is a way to derive a lot more ROI, have a lot more audiences, fuel your whole content marketing program, be integrated and omni-channel. And here's the kicker. Listen to your audience. When you divide pillar content up in pieces and then you deploy it, you distribute it, your audience gives you feedback. They tell you what they like. Suddenly comments blow up on this platform. You're like, wow, out of all of this, maybe my most compelling thing is this like remote work post. Okay, you know what? The content stack's not over. Let's jump into this post and break it up further into smaller pieces because that's what people are more interested in. Or maybe it wasn't this post, right? Maybe it was something about your vacation persona type. Okay, let's take that. Let's use that. Now let's do a new version of that for LinkedIn or for Medium or for blog posts or for video. So the point I want to make is the great thing about content stacks is actually not only efficiency, not only initial effectiveness, not only scalability, but it actually makes you, if you listen, more effective on the next go around because you can test way more stuff, figure out what works, right? Instead of taking one approach, you can take 12 approaches and then figure out what's best and then scale that. And so that makes you much, much better. And that makes your content much more better and relevant. And here's the good thing. Good content is contagious. One piece of good content can help you spawn future good pieces of content if you take the stackable content approach. Okay. So what is the best way to create a process for stackable content? So far, we've talked about, just as a recap, we've talked about, well, what are the biggest mistakes and what are the new rules? We talked about, well, how do we, what's a sort of a solution to this? It's stackable content. I've taken you through I've defined it. I've taken you through a content stack to show you what it looks like. So now let's talk about what is the best way to create a process for stackable content to actually deploy this in the wild. So first thing, as we presented, is determine your pillar content. That's going to be the basis for this. That's the part to look at. I gave you a little tip, which was try to have a format that's the easiest for you. And I also recommend when you're just starting out with this, pick pillar content that's easier for you to create from a content perspective, right? What are those topics that you just know better? What are the things you've done in the past that we can update or redeploy? We're often brought in like, our client has a white paper they did 3 years ago. Can we do a new version of it or a survey from 3 years ago? Do it better, make it more relevant. So first step is determine your pillar content. Here's what a pillar content calendar looks like. So here's the example from a client that's in fintech, looking back in April from looking at global payment systems to fintech as a service to dollars without borders. So these are pillar pieces of content that we want to say, and we can derive content stacks from it. Okay. So step one, plan your pillar content. Step two, align on a pillar content capture method. So we want to find out first of all, what are the activities, events, processes we already have going where we can capture more content. So maybe we're speaking at an online conference, or maybe we already are having, I don't know, the CEO do, his or her town hall or fireside chat. Can we look at existing pieces of content that already are being created? Can we look at what are the most developed teams? And for this, you need a team that's reliable, timely, that can deliver on schedule, because a lot of other content is derived from it. So you don't want the team that's always late, right? So who is the team that can deliver on time? What is their type of content? Let's align on that pillar content capture method. Step three. Now let's convert pillar content into other modalities. So if our initial content was a webinar like this one, now let's say, okay, how do we convert this, right? For instance, this is part of our content stack. We're recording the session. That recording session gets automatically transcribed. Then someone goes through that automatic transcription and cleans it up. Then we take that transcription and we start deploying other stuff from it. We start using it in that way. So convert pillar content into other modalities. And that's one way, actually, as I think either A, you're a big company, you have a lot of these internal people who can make this, or B, you go to an agency. One thing that is nice, that is typically much appreciated by our clients from our stackable content or content marketing offering, is that we're platform agnostic, meaning we have video teams and writing teams and design teams for infographics and animation teams. So it doesn't matter to us. We can make content across all of this. So it can be helpful. Either you have these teams internally, or else use a partner. We're happy to talk if you'd like, who can deploy in many different ways, in many different modalities. Step four, prototype potential macro content templates. So even though there's only one piece of pillar content, macro content's super important. Sometimes you expand upon something, you explore upon something in different ways, right? So to use that example of the Steve Jobs publicist example, in her big pillar content, she talked about the 3 types of companies that exist. Well, you might go in further and say, we only scratched the surface of each of the types. Now let's talk about the 7 characteristics of each one. That's in an article. Or now let's go deeper and talk about how this is deployed across different industries, right? What are the 3 types of companies in tech versus education versus healthcare versus finance, right? So start prototyping. Step 4, potential macro content templates. Here's an example from the same fintech client of ours, where we take that pillar content, the impact of COVID-19 on global payment systems, and then we're breaking it out into, would you choose a blog post on which countries are most likely to be disrupted, or a LinkedIn article on which industries have the most opportunities for growth, or a social series on dirty money and government's quarantine banknotes. So those are all possibilities. We can choose a couple, we can choose several, we can choose a limited number, but start building out your macro content, prototype potential macro content templates, number 4. Number 5, brainstorm new micro content headlines. This is the part that trips people up a little bit, is they say, okay, if my pillar content is like the future of real estate, then my micro content will be like, let's just tweak it, right? The future of real estate for millennials, the future of real estate for boomers, the future of real estate for Generation Z, the future of real estate for, and we can do alpha generation, right? Whatever we go. So you can do that way, but what I encourage you to do, especially with micro content, is maybe there's a new way of turning this on this head, right? Maybe a totally new content headline is like why in 10 years you'll never leave home to buy a house. I just made that up, right? Or maybe it's something totally different, right? Why your kids or your grandkids will co-own real estate, not own it outright, or whatever it might be. So envision new ways, right? The biggest mistakes people make when they plan out their real estate portfolio. So look for different ways to reinvent content. So it's not just, I think when people hear stackable content, they think, oh, I take my big video and I do the 5-minute cut and the 30-second cut and the 5-second GIF and call it a day. Instead of that, there's an element of that, but it's also reinvent, reimagine, redeploy, and it makes your content more effective. So here's an example of what a channel guide looks like for our clients, where we might say, okay, here's the possibilities for what goes on the website versus LinkedIn versus YouTube, right? So I have some choices. Is it a long form blog, a short form blog, an infographic? Is it a LinkedIn article? Is it a LinkedIn graphic post? Is it a long form video, a short form video, a tweet graphic post? Let's look at that. So we can kind of create a channel guide, which helps us give us kind of like a menu of options. So if we're coming here, we're saying like, okay, I'm looking for macro, micro, nano. What can I do? You can work off this menu. Step 6, identify compelling nano snippets. So what have we done? We've gone from pillar. We focused on like macro, like other big moments, big kind of content pushes. We've tried to reinvent ourselves with micro, and now we're looking for nano snippets, little bits, little teasers, other ways, flip it on its head, do it for, an audience with short attention span. And so we've gone from pillar to macro to micro to nano. Here's an example. We have blueprints for each part of stackable content. Here's our true or false blueprint, which is one I like for I want to give you a little sample. We have dozens of these blueprints. This is like, let's engage our audience by making them guess whether statistic insight from the pillar content is true or false. So is it true that 80% of people, don't want to ever go back and work in an office? True or false, right? So this is one example of how to do it, but I think with nano content, we use lots of different ways to juxtapose, compare, flip it over, flip an idea on its head. And these are all kind of constructs we use that can get engagement. Step 7, measure real-time performance. I love this one because I think this is what makes good marketers great. And that is, good marketers can do everything we've said, right? They can come up, they can know their audience, have a distribution plan. They can take bigger content pieces, divide them into little content pieces. They can be more efficient by approaching the stackable content approach. But to be great, what you have to do is be able to course correct in real time. And that's listening. That's looking at performance. That's saying like, oh, wow, that was pretty good. I give ourselves an A- on that, but like, can we optimize this, test, optimize, perform, top to get an A+. So listening, looking, and I think where you become great is not just that we will often work on, content for a content stack like a month in advance. But then when we're in the actual month when it's being deployed and we see something on day 8 in that month overperform, exceed expectations, then we're like, boom, we have something here. Let's iterate. Let's maximize that. Let's scale that. Test, optimize, perform, top, right? We do all those things, and then we measure real-time performance, and it makes us better and better. So that's step 7. Step 8, look at it, do exactly what I just said, and derive new content based on top performance. So it can impact that month of content you're in, but also let's take those insights and let's apply them to next month's pillar, okay, if this type of piece of content where we're asking this, like this true or false nano question did amazing, how do we apply this to the new pillar that we're doing? Let's leverage that as well. That's another way that you sort of get repeat gains from doing this on a regular cadence. So here's an example I want to show you of what our stackable content deliverables look like. We have different packages here. You can see bronze, silver, gold. It's all derived from how many pieces of pillar content are we doing in a given time frame. So this would be very typical for us, would be like during a month. Bronze is like one piece of pillar content, which turns into 2 pieces of macro, 5 pieces of micro, 7 pieces of nano. Versus a silver, we're doing twice, 2 of these pillars per month, or a gold, 4 of these pillars. So I think it's helpful to think about that. And what I'd maybe encourage you to do if you're doing this on your own is look at, okay, maybe we're going to be like bronze, right? Or even a little bit below bronze to start. And then as we get this going, we can sort of pick up the cadence and pick up the pace. And as you go to more types of pillar content, you can also get in more, strategic channels. You can go in more places as well. But that would be an example of how sort of this stackable content plan in terms of deliverables can be created. So if you do this right, here's the bottom line. Either on a weekly, a bi-weekly, or a monthly basis, we can transform a single piece of pillar content into often more than 20 pieces of stackable content. Content that each will actually perform better than your pillar content on your own. And the little secret is this: once you've made really good, compelling pillar content, I actually think you've done 80% of the work to deploy more than 20 content pieces that can continue to drive ROI and work for you for much, much longer than if you had just focused on that one monolithic piece of content that you started with. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pause there. Jackson, other thoughts, other comments or questions as I kind of get into my big wrap up of the day and send people on their way.
I think we're all good, Ben. Although I will say, if anyone in the chat has any additional questions or follow-ups, please do drop them in there. Also, I know, Ben, you're about to get into how to get in touch. I do want to note that I have shared links in the chat that include the URL to register for upcoming events, your YouTube channel, LinkedIn links for both of us, your Twitter handle, etc. So I know you're going to go through that now, but also for anyone who's with us in the chat, you can find the links, email addresses, etc. there as well.
Okay, and let me have one challenge to the group. And before I do that, just if you LinkedIn, I get hundreds of requests per day. Just like say you attended my webinar on the new rules of content marketing, so that I'll see it and I'll accept it. Ben.kaplan@topagency.com, questions or projects, and then tweet at me one thing, which is I always want to know what's the one thing from today, at Benjamin Kaplan that you learned, you remember, you found most useful, you found most interesting, that will stick with you. I always want to know the one thing. When I go to these types of events or webinars, I'm always like, it is well worth my time if I come away with one thing that I can use and deploy. So I would love to know your one thing. And let me suggest a challenge for you, which is, as a challenge, go back, after this and find the best piece of content you've created to date. Find the single best thing you're most proud of, that drove the most results, that got your sales team super excited, that you got the pat on the back from the CEO, whatever it is. Go look at that piece of content. I want you to do 2 things with it. That like best examples. One, look at that piece of content and say, could this be broken up? If this was macro, micro, or nano content, how would I break it up? Are there different audiences that you can reach? Is there something embedded in this that, like, it's an awesome point, but it's on page 12 and no one saw it, that we could pull out? So one, do that mental exercise. Take your best piece of content. Challenge to you is say, if I'm just going to break out the pieces and create a content stack, how would I do it? Second part of the challenge is jump on email. Send it to me, ben.kaplan@topagency.com. And it can be a link to something. It can be, you can attach it, you can't attach it, send me to the download page. I'll take a look at it too. Make some suggestions on what the macro, micro, and nano pieces are. And I think the best ways to learn this, the best way to internalize this is to think through this on your own and to get someone, like myself, like Jackson, who's done this hundreds of times, to give you input. And then you'll start to see and experience and create content in a whole new way. It will totally transform the ROI you can get from content marketing, it will lead to fame and fortune and anything else that a content marketer might want. But in all seriousness, what it will help you do is unlock the underlying potential of the content you're already doing and the great thinking and the great creative that you're already doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. It's going to unlock that. It's going to find hidden value, and you're going to be able to deploy that. And what you're going to discover is that your content can be more efficient, more effective, and more scalable than you ever thought possible. So ben.kaplan@topagency.com. Can't wait to see your pillar content. Jackson, thank you for hosting. Great insights and comments as always. Looking forward to the next one coming up. We haven't quite announced it yet, but it's going to be coming up. One of them every day on Wednesday is going to be the new rules of B2B email marketing. We're going to jump in, take a look at that channel, and we are just seeing B2B companies killing it right now. So if you're interested in that on email marketing, tune in for next week and we'll go from there. Thank you all for attending. I wish you that kind of success, and let's go create some amazing content stacks.